Well, welcome everybody to the Laramie County Master Gardener Program. Tonight's program is on pesticides. I thought about how to change the name so that it was like Assassin's Creed type approach to it, because that's kind of how you end up feeling at the end of this lecture, is a bug assassin. And so I apologize for that, but at the same time, I'm going to teach you how these pesticides work, what they do, and environmental impacts and people precautions. We'll talk a little bit about alternative methods instead of the hard chemicals. We'll talk a little bit about pesticides or herbicides. A little bit. Herbicides is tiny. Not a lot of research has been done on herbicides, which is kind of scary in a way. And all right. So definition of a pesticide. And the word pesticide is an umbrella term, big umbrella term. And it includes herbicides, fungicides, insecticides, avicides. It's a huge umbrella term, and it's kind of a generic word, but it's used a lot incorrectly. And when it's used incorrectly, it's usually targeting just insecticides. So we're going to kind of get the definition going correctly here. And so if you're trying to kill an insect, you're using an insecticide, and herbicides for plant material you don't want, and so forth. So a pesticide is any chemical, natural or human-made, that is designed to kill another organism. A pesticide. That's why I said I changed this name to, like how to be a bug assassin or something. So using that broad definition, hundreds of thousands of pesticides in the natural environment. And so this is kind of an interesting little thing that I came across, which I thought was very interesting. And this biological warfare was invented and perfected in nature. Must be kept in mind that for every scary synthetic pesticide man has created, nature has created something worse. Very true. And according to Dr. Bruce Ames, every plant produces roughly a few dozen toxins. And so this was crazy. Cabbage produces at least 49 known pesticides. And I love coleslaw. I eat that a lot. So here's the source if you want to look into a little bit more about that. Dietary pesticides, all natural, published in October of 1990 by Dr. Bruce Ames. Very interesting. So a bit of pesticide history. Before World War II, pesticides were predominantly inorganic items like sulfur, lead, copper, arsenic, boron, mercury. And of course, none of those are very benign, especially the lead, copper, arsenic, boron, mercury. Oh, those are pretty nasty. And they just were starting to get into the botanicals. Pyrethrin was one that was used quite a bit. Nicotine's been used for centuries. So World War II really created a whole new generation of pesticides, and it was the Swiss who developed DDT, and not the Americans. It was the Swiss that developed it. It changed totally how we deal with insects at that point, and it was incredibly effective. I mean, just hugely effective. And it also spun off some other pesticides, insecticides, lindane, dieldrin, chloridane, and then 2,4-D, which is actually an herbicide. So from DDT, it spun off all of these materials. And again, DDT is off the market, as you all know. And it was a good product, but it was just overused. It was misused and overused. It was totally abused. And so it came off the market because of that. So here's some interesting charts. So for you statistic lovers or chart lovers, which I have only 3, so you don't have to hang me later. But it's real interesting to see the US versus the world market. And so I think the US gets really hammered and kind of a black eye for or insecticide use or pesticide use, when the reality is, you know, if you look down here, we're actually, I actually have my pencils back. You know, we're actually pretty small in use compared to the world, which is way up there. This is from the EPA. EPA puts out all sorts of gobs of information, but it takes them a long time to really update information. So this is from 2007, this particular chart. But what I want you to notice is, you know, where these numbers are in 2007, and then really, I hope it's not going to be one of these nights with the technology. There we go. This is 2012. Let's see. Yeah, 2012 estimates. And again, the world use and the US use, you can see here's the United States. Here's the world use. The United States is actually using less, where the worldwide use has gone up substantially. So I guess I have issues where, you know, people portray the United States in a bad light without having the correct data. And I'm not going to argue the data from the EPA. So in the United States, who is using these? And we're working off amounts of money spent instead of poundage, because I think the amount of money spent is a little bit more telling. But if you look here, this is the column for insecticides. This is agricultural use. This is homeowner use. This does not include like your lawn care companies. This is just strictly a homeowner going to the big box store and buying an insecticide off the shelf and going home and using it. So if you look at the usage, you can, you know, agriculture again is painted in a bad light. But the reality is that homeowners are using a lot more. Other, I have no idea what other is. It's the bulk of that column is homeowners. They didn't explain what that is, but the website where you can find all this information is listed down here if you care to peruse the EPA documents. Okay, that's the charts. I'm not going to torture you with charts anymore. So active ingredients. Okay, the active ingredient is the actual pesticide chemical, and it'll be given to you, you know, when you look at that label, and I'm going to repeat this several times throughout the lecture, but the label is the law. And by federal law, you need to read that label and understand what's going on and how to use that product. So the label is the law. So when you look at that label, it's going to tell you what the active ingredient is and how much of it is there. And typically it's a very tiny amount. It's almost always under like 5% of the active ingredient. So there's other things added into these insecticides, and one of them is a synergist. And so a synergist enhances the effects of that active ingredient beyond what it would normally do by itself. So if there's 1% active ingredients, but there's 50% synergist in there, then it's making that active ingredient go a lot longer, a lot farther. So a little goes a longer way with a synergist added to it. One of those synergists is piperonal butoxide. it is derived from sesame seeds. Yeah, plants fight back, right? Plants is so like a little blurb in the front about toxic ingredients in plants. Here's one out of sesame seeds, and it is by itself, the piperonal butoxide, a registered insecticide. And it's primarily used in ingredients containing pyrethrins, so it makes the pyrethrins more potent. So on that label, by federal law, the active ingredient is identified by name on the pesticide label, along with its percentage or by weight. The other ingredient that's not listed other than inert makes up the bulk of that. So again, you could have like 1.5% active ingredient, and then the rest of it's all called inert. Well, unless it's your tabletop, it's pretty much not inert. And so by law, again, the label does not mean non-toxic. And a lot of times these inert chemicals in there are more toxic than the active ingredient. So, and they can contain more than one, I hate using the word inert because they're not inert, but they can contain more of those inert ingredients. And they can do everything from prevent caking or foaming. They can extend the shelf life. Some of them are solvents to help that herbicide penetrate a leaf, or some sort of a solvent to penetrate the cuticle on an insect, that catechin coating. So some of these inert ingredients are pretty scary. So just what am I talking about as far as inert ingredients? Well, you've got xylenes, got methylparaben, dimethyl ether, butane. Butane, really? Don't light a match near some of these things. Yeah. So this is an inert ingredient that you really have to respect. This one, this is polyethyl oxalated toluene. Pronunciation test at the end of the class. This is what's found. This is the alleged inert ingredient in Roundup. And this is incredibly toxic. And this is one where you have to wear gloves and don't let Roundup get on you. And it's not because of the glyphosate, it's because of this polyethyl oxalated toluene and its level of toxicity. And this chemical it kind of breaks down that waxy cuticle layer on a leaf so that the Roundup can penetrate more effectively. It has its own patent. And if you want to do more research on it, here's the website to go to. But again, the label's the law. Read the label. If it says put gloves on and protection, respect that, because those inert ingredients are scary. Okay, so subclass group by types of and I'm going to pesticides. This is another umbrella term because we're talking about an arachnicide, which is different from an insecticide. So for all of those of you who don't want to deal with spiders on drugs, this is the other drug. Attractants, avicide, that's to repel birds. There's the repellent for birds is actually derived from grapes, of all things, from grapes. Again, you know, the very fruit that you love to eat can actually also be a repellent to birds, even though birds like to eat grapes. Bactericide, think about your soap in your kitchen that's a bacteria that kills 99.9% of all germs. That's a bactericide. Fungicides, most fungicides, pretty ineffective. herbicides, insecticides. So that's why the term pesticide is such an umbrella term, and there's so many other things underneath it. So classified by function, you got attractants, and so you got to appreciate, you know, an attractant that includes sex-based and food-based. My first thought was, wow, it sounds like a bar. It's like, those are usually, think about things that you can hang in your apple trees, the pheromone traps to attract the male codling moth. So he flies into the pheromone trap bar and gets stuck. Repellents. Repellents are tough. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. I haven't, I've not really gotten great feedback from people about deer repellents and antelope and some of the other ones. So it's kind of a hit or miss on that. I've heard some homemade stuff as far as repelling deer from hanging Irish Spring and Lifebuoy soap. That's a repellent just by walking through the aisles of that stuff. Desiccants. So one of the bigger desiccants that's used is diatomaceous earth. It's easy to buy. You should be able to go to a good nursery and be able to buy diatomaceous earth. But this works. This is the skeletonized remains of diatoms. And those remains look like, if you look at it under a microscope, it looks like broken glass. And so it works really effective against soft-bodied insects, where it literally abrades the insect and the insect leaks to death. Doesn't work real well on slimy insects like slugs. They're just too wet. They just kind of crawl across it. Silica aerogel, that just pulls moisture out of the air. And so that can work in certain circumstances, but again, it helps that it's a soft-bodied insect. And for these desiccants to work, a lot of times that insect actually has to crawl across it, or it has to actually be on their body. So this is something that would work for aphids. This will work real well for aphids. Probably work well on whiteflies, mealybugs, those guys. Okay, pass through. Pass through. So this is for everyone who owns horses or cattle or whatever. You can actually buy a livestock mineral tub that's got a product in it called Raybon. And Raybon passes through the animal and comes out in the manure. And then when flies go to lay on the manure and those eggs hatch into maggots and the maggots start to eat the manure, they're eating Raybon, which is an insecticide, it's actually a larvicide, and it kills the larva or the maggots. Systemics. I like recommending systemics to homeowners. They're easy, typically, they're very easy to apply. It's more of a soil drench. So you mix it with water and you pour it around the trunk of the tree, and the tree absorbs it. Do it once a year. I like the systemics, easy to use. You're not spraying. You know, one of the big problems with trying to spray an insecticide is drift and actually getting it on the target. Very difficult to do. Okay, bifunction continues here. So we've got growth regulators, and that means that as the insect itself grows, it's not able to molt. And so its exoskeleton crushes it. Contact poisons, stomach poisons, dust, baits, aerosols, fumigants. The list is pretty extensive. And so then you start talking about modes of action. How does this insecticide or herbicide work? What is its mode of action? So we look at it as a contact poison where it actually has to touch that insect's body. Is it something that has to be eaten, so now that it becomes a stomach poison? Or is it something that is applied to the plant as a drench, and it makes the plant toxic to the insect, and so as the insect eats it, then it kills the insect, again, almost by the same mode as a stomach poison. So lethal dose. So now we're going to go a little bit to the people side of this. And lethal dose is a measurement. Oh, sorry. Lethal dose is a lab approach to how much of this insecticide will kill a person. And so that's kind of a grim way to look at it, but we've got to know what the lethal dose of this is so that we can classify it as to its toxicity. So a lethal dose is measured in kilograms of insecticide or herbicide or whatever, kilograms per body weight. So we start off with an LD of 50, which is the benchmark, and so it can either go lower or it can go higher. When you start getting below LD 50, it gets pretty scary stuff, and that's got to be used by a licensed pesticide applicator. And if they're using even an LD 50, if they're using something that potent, they are in hazmat suit and maybe even supplied oxygen. And you're going to see insecticides at that level used for greenhouses to try to kill off spider mites, white flies, a few other thrips, a few other insects that plague greenhouses. And when they start reaching for something at this level, they are losing the war. This is the Hail Mary toss, and they probably have already lost. So lethal dose is, here's another way to look at it. Laundry bleach has got an LD lethal dose of 150. And you remember the benchmark number is 50. So this is just 100 points above that. And so that makes bleach very toxic. So a taste to a teaspoon is all that it would take to kill a 150-pound person. And then it goes on into, rubber cement. I can remember little boys in grade school putting rubber cement on their hand and then rattling it into a ball. I don't know how many of them ate that. I don't think they did, but liquid detergent. So you can see that some of this stuff doesn't take much. Some of it takes a lot. So bleach is very, very toxic. You have to really respect that. Rubber cement, highly toxic. I don't know anyone who would want to eat that, but there it is. So this also then transfers onto warning labels on that bottle of pesticide, whatever that pesticide is. There should be a warning label on there. So your category 1 is going to be danger, and that's highly hazardous, poisonous, taste to a teaspoon. Okay. So from Linda, it says, seems strange that baby lotion has a level of toxicity. Yeah, I don't even remember where I found that, but yeah. Don't eat Tide Pods. God, what is it with kids trying to eat laundry pods? It's crazy. That's got to be a little boy thing. Category 2, warning, moderately hazard, teaspoon to a tablespoon. So again, your danger and your warning is going to be, you got to respect that. Got to really respect that. And I think this is, the warning is where Roundup falls into. So wear protective gear. Then you get into your category 3 and 4 pesticides. That's a caution, slightly hazardous to relatively non-hazardous, ounce to a pint. Okay, so words on the label. You're often going to see these pictures instead of written warnings. Skull and crossbones, we all respect that. Warning, moderately toxic, caution, slightly to relatively non-toxic, but still be careful. And again, the label is the law. Gotta read that label. I swear it's in like 2-point font, and you need a magnifying glass, and it's awful, and it goes on forever. So they don't make it easy. Okay, from a client, this is from a yard call. This is from one that came several years ago. I used Fertilome Systemic Drench for the tree. This was on a peach tree. Last year on my fruit trees. This year it has a large harvest of fruit, peaches. I'm thinking, God, lucky you. It's like we had a good spring. I'm concerned the fruit is not fit for consumption because it may contain pesticide. It would be a shame to let it go to waste, but I obviously don't want to eat toxic fruit. Please advise. She never read the label. If she had read the label before she had used this, she would have known that it's not labeled for use on peach trees. And peach trees are visited by honeybees. Even though it's kind of a self-fertile tree, it's still visited by pollinators. And it's like, so I got back to her and I said, you cannot eat them. So read the label and make sure that it's for that plant. Okay, pesticide entry, again, kind of modes of action, but this, we're still sticking to the people side of this. So you can get it on your skin, you can ingest it, or you can breathe it in. I was doing a yard call a number of years ago, and I was looking at acreage. I was on acreage, and the guy had lots and lots of trees. And he had a little spray bottle with him, and he had it hooked onto his hip. And he said, yep, this is a bottle of 7, and if you point out an insect, I will kill it. Like, okay. So we walked around the whole property, looked at every tree, got back, and I kind of gave him my standard lesson about how these insecticides work. So not only was he handling it with his bare hands, so now we're talking dermal, but he had bare hands, and in the other hand he had an iced tea. And if you spray that, and it was slightly breezy out, it's Wyoming, and he risked breathing it in. So he could have gotten, just by the way he was handling it and using it, he could have gotten all 3 entry points. So from Kathy, how many seasons before the peaches could be eaten again? I would give it a full 2 growing seasons. So she put it in year 1, and so that those systemics are good for a full year. So she lost that year, and it would have been year 2 before she could have eaten peaches, providing that we had a spring that would be conducive to fruit set. So yeah, read the label. So your skin is a big sponge. And this, I guess I do have one more chart for you to look at, sorry. Rates of absorption of pesticides in the human body. And so, umbrella term, I'm going to assume that they're really talking about insecticides more than they are the other gamut of chemicals. But you can see, the scalp has got a rating of about 4.5, the forehead about 5, and this one was fascinating. The ear canal is almost 6, right here, poking your finger in your ear. That's 6. Armpit, 7.5, and then the rest of the stuff is kind of low down on the chart. And my caveat in each class is always, guys, hello, wash your hands. So your skin is a big sponge. So if you're going to use an insecticide, especially, no shorts, no flip-flops, long pants, gloves, face protection. And then when you take it all off, you've got to be super careful, and it should all go in the laundry and it should get washed right away. Don't wear it around the rest of the day. Take it off when you're done and throw it in the laundry, wash it. Okay, back to the lethal dose again of insecticides. I used to try to scare my smokers in the class with this, it's like tobacco, when they grow tobacco, it's, wow, they spray it with so much stuff. It's incredible. But just tobacco by itself, if you were to eat the leaf, lethal dose of 50 to 60. I mean, that's really, really toxic. 7, which you can go to Walmart and buy, has a lethal dose of 850 milligrams per kilogram. So it's not safe. Malathion, 885 to 2800, depending upon how you mix it. Again, it usually comes in a concentrate and you've got to dilute it. Pyrethrins, not too bad, but these two right here, 7 and malathion, you can buy those. Those are readily available. Respect the toxicity of them, and always remember that your skin is a big sponge. Be careful. Neem oil, almost non-toxic. Neem oil, you can go to natural grocers and find neem oil preparations in toothpaste. That's how benign this stuff is. Pyrethrins, they're still fairly toxic, mildly toxic. So you still have to respect them. And again, the smaller the number, the more harmful. So these numbers here, got to respect that. So people problems. There was a study done by the 99th US Congress. They commissioned a study on neurotoxicity, specifically on insecticides. And they were able to trace a lot of this stuff back to neurodegenerative diseases, to Parkinson's and Alzheimer's have been linked to insecticide chemical exposure. And this is actually a pretty big problem in Nebraska and Kansas and Iowa, where huge corn growing belts, and they use a lot of insecticides back there. And so this has gotten to be a pretty serious problem with the farmers getting Parkinson's, especially. So herbicides, not a lot of research done on herbicides, but we do know that some of those are hormone mimics and they can interfere with testosterone and estrogen. Methoxychloral, marlate, it's an organochlorine pesticide. A lot of these are only chemicals that you can get if you're an applicator, licensed applicator. Study discovered process was disruptive to estrogen. The results, adult human males had low sperm counts and reduced fertility. Here's the research I used on that one. So again, I don't want to teach you all how to use these chemicals or how to mix them or how to apply them or the application rate. I really want you all to understand the people problems and how they work, because they're not benign. Just because you can buy it in Walmart doesn't mean it's safe. Some of the symptoms, if you got insecticide poisoning or pesticide poisoning of some sort, some of the really severe symptoms, apprehensive, twitching, tremors, confusion, convulsions. More commonly, it's flu-like symptoms. Flu in the middle of the summer, really? Mammals, I did a yard call a couple years ago. The guy had pear slugs, which are the larvae of the sawfly, and they do a lot of cosmetic damage, and they're kind of gross looking. And he had cotoneasters, which sawflies love cotoneasters, and so he went around and sprayed with orthene, and his little dog was with him while he was spraying, he didn't think he did a good enough job with the orthine, so he went back and got malathion and resprayed. So he sprayed it twice with 2 different chemicals the whole time his dog was with him. And a couple days later, his dog started having convulsions and tremors and all sorts of scary problems. Took him to the vet. $1,000 later, the vet just came up and says, I don't know what's wrong with your dog, but he seems to be getting better. And so the guy had me come out and do a yard call because he was concerned about, the cosmetic damage done by this pear slugs. And so I identified the plant, identified the insect. We walked around, we looked at everything. And I asked him to show me what he'd used. And in the meantime, he was telling me about his dog because he was really freaked out about his dog. And so I explained to him how these chemicals work. And he just turned pale and looked at me and says, oh my God, I poisoned my dog. I said, yeah, the dog should have been given activated charcoal and probably something else supportive. And he just was mortified. But he didn't read the label. Read the label. Okay, off my soapbox. Modes of action, again, nerve poisons. These are insecticides. These are how insecticides work. Nerve poisons, muscle poisons, physical toxins, and repellents. So the nerve poisons, these act by interrupting the normal synaptic transmission of the nervous system. And so they interfere with the cholinesterase enzymes between the nerves. And so by interfering with that enzyme, it causes the nerves to continue to fire. And so the insect essentially just shakes itself to death. So it'd be like if you'd consumed 10 pots of coffee and you just shook yourself to death. That's kind of how these work. And again, axon poisons, again, they work pretty much the same way. Those are your pyrethroids, chlorinated hydrocarbons. So they're nerve poisons. And again, these are the ones they've linked back to Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. Carbamates, also in that same way. Nicotine sulfates, those are all nerve poisons. Black flag was a very popular insecticide for a long time, and that was a nicotine-derived insecticide. They pulled that off the market because it was being misused, and there was a lot of people problems from that. Okay, physical toxins. Again, this is kind of a, 50 ways to kill a bug. Physical toxins block the metabolic process via physical rather than chemical means. So think of like your oils. So for a while, people would put oil on water to kill the larvae of the mosquitoes. It's a physical toxin, so they would kind of, they would suffocate and drown. Insects, remember, have breathing ports along their side of their body called spiracles. And so these physical toxins that coat them clog up the spiracles so they can't breathe. And so they just suffocate. Repellents, these don't kill. Depends on what you're trying to repel, I guess. Very low to no toxicity. So think of like garlic. Garlic can be used as a repellent. Essential oils can be used as a repellent. And low toxicity, it's more of a smell type thing. DEET is also a repellent. It's been used since 1946. Very effective in repelling a broad spectrum of insects, especially mosquitoes, more important than ever, especially with some of the viruses that mosquitoes can carry, the Zika and the West Nile. Once in a while, talking with Bob Lee at the city, they run across the West Nile mosquito here in Laramie County. So DEET, again, 40 years plus of use. Usually the only problem that they run into with this is when it's been misused. So here's my misuse story. And it goes back to watching a lady at the farmer's market take a bottle of hand sanitizer to her little boy whose face was dirty, and she washed his face with hand sanitizer. So I can only imagine that she probably runs him through some sort of a sheep dip of DEET to make sure that mosquitoes stay off. That would be an abuse of the product. So chemical groups, inorganic and carbon-based. So inorganic pesticides are going to be stable and water soluble. Those are your boric acid, borates, chlorates, copper sulfate, silical aerogel, stomach poisons, sodium hypochlorite, which is bleach. You know, every once in a while someone will call me and say, well, I took bleach and I poured it all over the ants. I killed a bunch of them. Yeah, the queen ant just made more to replace the ones you killed. So bleach works by burning the pest, so it oxidizes the tissue. It literally just burns that exoskeleton off of them. Borate, boric acid, borates. 20-mule team is a borate, and you can use 20-mule team as to go after ants. If the ants will get it on their legs and they take it down into the nest and they groom it off of themselves and ingest it, it'll kill them. Silical aerogel, again, that just sort of desiccates. Then you got the carbon-based ones, and the carbon-based ones are the ones that are pretty scary. They contain hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur. I'm sure there's nitrogen. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of other combinations. These are our modern pesticides, and these are the ones with the fairly high toxicity to them. So you've got your organophosphates, malathion, methylparathion, diazinon, 7-carbamates, chlorinated hydrocarbons, DDT, chlordane, eldane, dieldrin, diazinon, now off the market. Diazinon used to be mixed in lawn fertilizers. You used to be able to buy a lawn fertilizer that had a diazinon in it as an insecticide. Then there was an herbicide in it and a fertilizer in it. They finally pulled it off the market in like 2007, I think. And sometimes I still see it out there in fertilizer bags, and it's just old product that they're still trying to get rid of. But the problem is that it would kill the insect, but birds would come along and eat that poisoned insect, and then they would get poisoned themselves. So it worked its way up the food chain in the wildlife. The chlorinated hydrocarbons, no longer available in the United States. However, DDT is still used in South America and Africa. Africa is getting more and more away from it. It was very effective against mosquitoes and trying to control the mosquito that carries malaria. They're using other products now, but it's used, DDT is still used a lot down in South America, which, you know, it's manufactured in the United States and then we ship it. So it's unfortunate. Organophosphates, again, this is a byproduct of chemical warfare research. Diazinon, malathion, orthine. Again, you can still buy malathion and orthine. Again, very toxic stuff. Read the label if you have to use it. They're nerve toxins. And these are all, again, think of the wildlife too, because it does impact the wildlife. For 75% of malathion to break down in the environment, it takes a full year. So it's very persistent by today's standards. It's also highly toxic to bees, wildlife, and people. And again, off the market, but once in a while I still see it. When I go in the big box stores, I still see it in fertilizer bags. Used for grubs, lawn grubs, army cumpworms. Very persistent in the environment. 7, oops. Again, still used, we used it a lot during the mountain pine beetle epidemic. Used it a lot. And the only good thing with it is that for whatever reason, 7 bonds with the bark on a tree, and it stays there for a full year. So it was a one-time application. But again, it's a nerve toxin. It affects more than just the target insect. It affects all the insects. It's really non-selective. Chloronicotinils, again, another nerve toxin, broad spectrum, long residual, low rate. A little goes a long ways with these guys. Modeled after natural nicotine. So these are the neonicotinoids. Now, the neonicotinoids have gotten a really bad rap recently, and they're blamed for honeybee deaths. Well, I beg to differ. Really, when you look at all the other chemicals that are used, not only homeowners, and we looked at that graph, so you know that homeowners actually use more insecticides than agriculture does. But again, agriculture is getting hit pretty hard on these. I like the neonicotinoids, and I like to recommend them for homeowner use, especially on non-flowering trees and shrubs. On non-flowering trees and shrubs, they're amazing. They're easy for the homeowner to use. They're used as a soil drench, so you mix it with water, you pour it around the base of the tree, and it's good for a year. So it's a one-time, once-a-year application. Best time to do it's in the fall, and it's a 30-minute at most chore. When you recommend imidacloprid, which is Bayer Advanced Garden Tree and Shrub, it's for every inch of trunk circumference, so going around every inch of trunk circumference, it's 1 ounce of product. It can get a little expensive, but when you're talking about a valuable tree in the landscape, this is really important. It's worth the price. And the other interesting thing about this, and another reason why I like to recommend it, is that it works on insects more than warm-blooded animals. And so your flea and tick collars for dogs and cats, that is a neonicotinoid in there, because the LD level is, the number is so huge on it, 15,000 or something like that. So it's very non-toxic to people and to pets. And and this is one reason why I hate to see this particular chemical be so maligned, because again, it's a low toxicity. It doesn't hurt mammals. Used correctly, that's the big one. It's very effective against insects that go after trees and shrubs. What happens with the neonicotinoids is that if they're, and I see this with the lawn care companies, your True Green, your Chem Lawn, where they have that big tank of green solution. They mix a neonicotinoid with a fungicide. And so what we know about fungicides is that they act as a synergist to neonicotinoids, and they will make the neonicotinoids 10 times more potent than what they would be by themselves. So that stuff they spray on lawns is pretty toxic, and they put the little flags out about, keep your dogs in, don't play on your lawn, the little scary warning things. And you got to take that seriously, especially with the pets, because especially cats that love to groom themselves, they go out into the lawn, they come back in and they start licking their paws and grooming themselves. They're ingesting this this now very toxic mix. So used right, it's amazing. You mixed with other stuff, it's pretty scary stuff. So again, read the label. Okay, on flowering plants, I want to emphasize, do not use on flowering plants. A plant that is flowering, like a linden tree, can pull this stuff up, and even though that flower and that nectar tube shouldn't be part of the vascular system, and it shouldn't be pulling up any of the neonicotinoids, it does. huge problem out in Oregon, how about 10 years ago now, where a lawn care company didn't read the label, applied this chemical soup, sprayed a parking lot full of American linden trees, made them incredibly toxic. Bumblebees came in and started to take the nectar and the pollen and were just dropping out of the tree, just thousands and thousands. And of course, this was right in the backyard of the Xerces Society, which is a society dedicated to the preservation and help of pollinating insects and butterflies. That was just incredible. They got out nets, netted the trees to keep the bees off of the trees, and a big lawsuit against the lawn care company, and read the label. So you don't want to use this on flowering plants. This is in rose. There is a rose formula, a feed and insecticide rose formula. You don't want to use those because those have systemics in them. That makes it very toxic to bees and bumblebees, and they both like to frequent roses. So be careful with what you fertilize your rose with. Okay, pyrethrum, pyrethroids, and pyrethrin. So it's all a little confusing because they sound so alike, but they're all slightly different. So pyrethrum and its derivatives refer to the dried powdered flower heads of the plant Pyrethrum roseum and Chrysanthemum coccineum. And one of the first and really kind of important insecticides ever developed, and it kind of goes back into China's ancient history. It's only persistent for a few hours, which really makes it very ideal, especially for homeowners, so that it's not lingering like malathion. You know, a year later, it's still persistent in the soil. This is only good for a couple hours. Most of these break down in sunlight. And depending upon the conditions, the weather conditions, whether it's dry out or rainy, humid or whatever, if there's humidity and sun, it breaks down faster. So pyrethrin, again, another nerve toxin, but this one is one where some of the insects have figured out how to detoxify pyrethrin, and they recover from the initial knockdown. So you go around and use a pyrethrin and spray it, and you think, oh, that bug is dead. Dead bug is a good bug. And all of a sudden it shakes it off and gets up and walks off. Well, a lot of times these insects have developed, especially your bad bugs, have figured out how to detoxify some of these insecticides. So the way to combat that, the chemical companies put a synergist in there. And so the typical synergist for pyrethrin is piperonyl butoxide, which is that chemical derived from sesame seeds. And so that blocks the insect's ability to break down or detoxify itself. Pyrethroids synthetic compound resembles pyrethrins, but are more toxic. Last 10 days or longer in the environment. So they're persistent, much more persistent by our standards today. And these are also toxic to bees. So if you're trying to do a pollinator garden, these are toxic to your pollinators and your butterflies. I see them used in vegetable gardens, and so your big box store people, they don't know the difference with any of these. They're just so told to sell this stuff. And so they'll reach for this and give it to a homeowner, or they'll hand them 7 for their vegetable garden. And it's like, no, it's not safe. It makes me crazy. Permethrin, synthetic pyrethroid families, goes back to 73. Nursery stock, cotton, corn. Home use persists for 3 days, so not bad. If it's used outside, breaks down probably a little quicker. If it's used in the house, it's going to last a little bit longer. Pyrethrin. Again, all of these are toxic to honeybees and your beneficial insects. So honeybees and butterflies are very fragile little creatures. And even just the vapors, if you can smell it, they can too, and that's enough to kill them. So it doesn't take a lot to knock out your good insects. And then, of course, the insects that we would really like to control, like cockroaches, headlights, a bunch of others, they're all resistant to most of this stuff. Spider mites, there's almost no chemical control for spider mites anymore. Same thing for thrips. They're so resistant that you almost have to just get out the shop vac and vacuum them off, or pull out the plants and start over again. Okay, so what if you ingest any of these, or your pet gets tangled up in this stuff? Heaven forbid, a kid, Rocky Mountain Poison Center, and in a National Pesticide Information Center. These are the people to call that will help you. I have this lecture as a PDF, and I have it posted on the Laramie County Extension website under Ag and Hort and the Master Gardener page. So if you want to access it and download it, copy it to your own computer, you're welcome to do that so that you have the information available. Okay, so pesticide persistence, a little bit about that. They all break down eventually into hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen, nitrogen, sulfur, whatever else is there. Sometimes they can actually recombine into other things, and the researchers and chemists, that is just such a dark area of information that they can't even begin to research out because the soil pH, what else is there, water, lack of water, how do they break down? They don't even know all the chemical combinations that these could recombine into. So that's why these short-lived ones are so much more used today. They break down in hours or a few days. And that's really, if you've got to use an insecticide, this is what you want to reach for. So long-lived ones, boy, DDT is one of those extremely long-lived ones. They still find that. It's very, very persistent. I don't think they really know what the half-life of DDT really is. But again, how these break down are determined by conditions of your air temperature, sunlight, humidity, soil pH, soil type, a lot of factors into how long they're lived and how they break down. So resurgence. That's when you've sprayed, or someone has sprayed, and someone has sprayed and sprayed, and so but the insects aren't going away. And what happens is you start killing off your good insects, the good guys. And these are the insects that would also keep the bad guys in control. So now you start to lose that balance. And so the balance now is leaning towards the bad insects. And so they can come back even worse than what they were before. So if you had 10 insects, bad guys, you were trying to get rid of, but you accidentally wiped out all your good guys, and the bad guys that survived the attack came back, and all of a sudden there was 10, now there's 10,000. So resurgence can mean that the problem can worsen. So resistance. Insects, especially the bad insects, are the most adaptable organism on the face of the earth. Look at cockroaches. Oh my gosh. Cockroaches have been around since the dawn of time. Managed to survive 400 million years by adjusting to changes in their environment. There are over 500 pest species that exhibit some levels of resistance to at least one type of insecticide. That's a lot, and those are typically the bad guys. Biomagnification. So this is where, if we're going to look at water, this was actually a couple of very important case studies, both on ospreys and the brown pelican. Pesticide, the insecticide, got into the water. And so the microorganisms, your plankton and whatever else, algae, starts to pick this stuff up and absorb it. If it's hit in the water and it's only 0.04 parts per million, that's pretty benign. That's pretty diluted. But these organisms are picking it up, or absorbing it. Then you've got the next level of the food chain, which comes along, and that might be their food source, the plankton and maybe some of the algae, and then they start to eat it. But they eat a lot of it. I mean, they have to eat a lot of it to survive, right? And all of a sudden, they start testing out at 0.23 parts per million. So now we're getting a little higher level. So then, of course, you know, there's always the big fish that eats the little fish. And so this big fish is now eating more of these little fish. And so pretty soon, these secondary consumers are showing up at 2.07 parts per million. So they're starting to have a pretty substantial toxic load of insecticides, of these chemicals. Then you get your tertiary consumers. So in this case, this is the osprey. And the osprey is now eating the big fish that ate the little fish that ate the plankton. And now these ospreys are coming up with 13.8 parts per million, which is huge, which is very toxic. And so the birds were having a lot of problems. And again, there was another study down in Florida with the brown pelicans having the same problem. And so there was a lot of work done to keep these insecticides out of the waterways to try to save the brown pelicans. And ospreys, grew up in Wisconsin, watched ospreys fish all the time. It was very interesting to do that. But you can see how it starts out pretty low, and oh, this is harmless at the 0.04 parts per million, but by the time it gets up to the top of the food chain, the biomagnification makes it very, very toxic. And again, the study that this came from was from Dr. John R. Meyer in the Department of Entomology at North Carolina State University. Several other studies out there on there. You can pull up the brown pelican story. Okay, when and how to apply. So this is one of those things as a master gardener, and even when I go out and do yard calls, the homeowner is going to want to know what to kill it with. What do I spray it with? That's one of the top questions. What do I spray it with? If it's got to be sprayed, and this is really, especially for trees and shrubs, which are giant creatures, you can't spot spray a tree, and you can't really spot spray shrubbery. And when you do spray a tree, when the tree companies come out and spray, they try to do it early in the morning before the wind picks up, or the bees are out flying, or do it late in the day when they have the same conditions. So for some minor areas, spot spraying is best. You want to avoid repeat spraying at all. And you only want to spray if there's an indication of insects that need to be killed. But it goes back to identify the plant. Is this normal? Then identify the insect. So peonies, we all know that peonies in the spring, when they have that bud, it's crawling with ants. And I always get a call in the spring from someone that says, well, what can I spray my peony with because it's full of ants? It helps to know that on a peony, there's a symbiotic relationship between that plant and ants. The peony is feeding the ants so that the ants protect it from aphids. And you don't want to spray it. There's no need to. It helps to know what's really going on. You always want to protect the soil, because here in Wyoming, especially in some areas like Pine Bluffs where it's a fractured granite formation, and that water filters through really, really fast. And I can remember reading some articles in the Pine Bluffs Post about, the municipal workers talking about how fast the water level rose in the well after a rainstorm. And so that water filtrates really, really fast. And I'm on a sandy loam soil, so I know the water filtrates very quickly. On a heavy clay soil, the water's not going to filtrate very quickly, but you're looking at an accumulation of stuff over time. A lot of times the wind blows it away, but that's a whole nother story. You want to protect the water, air, plants, phytotoxicity. Done yard calls where if a little was good, more was better. And it had been sprayed to the point where the plants had picked up this phytotoxicity and the leaves had turned yellow with black margins. And the whole area just reeked of chemicals. Of course, you want to protect your bugs. And importantly, you want to protect yourself, protect you, your family, your pets, because this stuff is kind of scary. Oh, sorry. Forgot about this chart. So the good news. So there is good news. And so, again, I'm going to look at the genetically modified crops. A lot of genetically modified corn in Iowa, soybeans. But if you look at the charts and the reduction in insecticides, because they're using crops that now have a natural protection against, like the corn earworm and the Army cutworm, which are devastating in cornfields, they're using a lot less chemicals, a lot less insecticides than they were in 1980. You can see the drop in the amount of insecticides that use. And this chart only goes back to 2007. And so I suspect that has dropped even more since they've started to use crops that are infused with a natural occurring insecticide. So I don't look at GMOs as being bad. I look at them as being something that's keeping these incredibly bad chemicals out of our environment. And unfortunately, people don't see that side of the story. Is if you didn't use those, this point here would probably be up like this. And that's not good. That's not good, because the people problems and the environmental problems are huge. Okay. So in my yard call, I come across all sorts of fun stuff in people's garages, and I tell them that they need to get rid of it. I have come across DDT, chlordane, lindane, all of them. I have come across them all. You can call the City of Cheyenne Sanitation Department. They will take this stuff from you. You do need to call and make an appointment and let them know what you're bringing in. And the last I checked, they didn't charge for this. They really want to get this stuff out of there, but they'll take just about anything. You got black flag, you got old paint, whatever. They'll take it just to get it out of the system. Okay. So I think we should take a break at this point. Take about a I don't know, 10-minute break. Well, you guys can get up and run, get some tea or potty break or whatever. So let's take a quick break. And again, if you've got questions, by all means, you can interrupt me anytime. And again, but anyway, let's take just a quick break. So I got a question here from Holly. Can diatomaceous earth hurt good bugs as well? Bees are pretty hairy, and so they're really not fall into that soft-bodied insect category. And so I don't see a huge problem with that, but I'm not sure why or how bees would get into diatomaceous earth. I suppose if you're putting it on a flower to get rid of the aphids, but typically the aphids shouldn't be in the actual flower part. They should be more along the stems or under the leaves. So again, you got to flip that, kind of turn that leaf over and dust it. So I would think that you'd be okay that way. So questions, thoughts, comments, anything's welcome. I always treat this as sort of open mic nights. So if you've got something you want to contribute, I'd love to hear it.
I would just say that it's pretty darn scary, you know?
Yeah, it is. It is, but it's, the label doesn't really portray the level of concern you should have. I mean, you do read the label, but it doesn't talk about the people problems. And it's not until you get into those people problem areas that you kind of go, oh, because we're really nothing more than a giant bug. And when you look back at how these were historically developed, this chemical warfare against people, and then we miniaturized it down to insects, we were where it started. Scary. Yeah, chemicals make me nervous too. I have a lot of respect for them, a lot of respect. Yeah, and indeed, that's really true. And when I run into it out in the field, especially that story about the guy and his little dog, it was like a little poodle Maltese something. And that was really sad. And he spent a lot of money, and how, if you'd read the label, read the label. Yeah. Yeah, Silent Spring by Rachel Carlson. That was a very good observation on her part. So any moves to make these products less available to the public, and who would do that? EPA. This all falls under the jurisdiction of the EPA. And I'm kind of in that camp where I don't think that any of these should be sold to a homeowner. The 7, the malathion, the orethene. And it's like, no offense, but homeowners just don't read the label. They just don't, and it's kind of unfortunate. And then when I watched the True Green ChemLawn workers, and they're not wearing protective equipment, they're not even wearing gloves, and you can see them, they're running through people's yards, spraying this chemical soup, jump into the truck, drive off. Next yard, same thing. And I know that the company talks about protective equipment, but it's not always enforced. And report them to OSHA. Maybe, maybe. I mean, OSHA's pretty serious themselves, but if the worker's not following the rules, then it's kind of outside of an OSHA issue. We used to use those lawn care products with diazinon because it controlled the fire ant in Mississippi. Oh, the fire ant's a whole new monster from the Black Lagoon creature, and trying to control fire ants is difficult, and they absolutely have to be controlled. That's a scary insect.
So how do you control fire ants, or what are they doing about fire ants? They're horrible. My daughter got in them one time and she had about 100 bites in 2 seconds.
Yeah, and you can die from that.
Oh, they're horrible.
Oh gosh. I honestly, I don't know what they're using to control those anymore. We don't have fire ants in Wyoming. There's, yeah, I don't know.
What kinds of critters like to eat them?
Aardvarks, but we don't have them here. Yeah. I don't even know if birds go after them. I just don't know enough about fire ants, and thankfully they're not here. It's too cold, too dry. Texas has huge problems with fire ants. So I think they're, and if you had them in Mississippi, I think that's kind of indicative as to the environment they like, that warm, humid, moist water. We don't have that.
I have a friend in Mississippi who lives in the country, and she gets really large mounds of fire ants in her horse pastures. And she puts 7 dust on the hills because it seems to be the most benign of anything, and it doesn't seem to affect her horses. But I don't know. That's what she does. She puts 7 dust, the 7 powder on fire ant kills. They don't like it. It kills them, but I don't think that's probably the best result.
So the thing with ants, the trick with controlling and killing ants is that you've got to get the queen. And in those big nests, there can be a dozen queens. And so it's all about killing the queen. If you're just killing the surface workers, like you are with 7, you're not accomplishing anything. And so that trick is to get the queen. There's some home approaches to it, some pretty benign home approaches to it. Flour, white flour, is a stomach poison to ants. Cinnamon, boric acid, 20 mule team, laundry soap. For the little sugar ants, you can use aspartame, which is equal, that sugar substitute. That'll take them out. Takes them out really fast. I get the little sugar ants in my vegetable garden, and I'll put some equal on there, some aspartame, and they're usually gone the next morning. It just kills them that fast. Which raises the question of, why do we eat that? Okay, some better ways to control pests. So this is, now that I've got you aware of how these chemicals work, let's look at some other ways to control them that aren't quite so toxic. And again, we go back to that whole integrated pest management. And integrated pest management is where you got to identify the plant, try to identify the problem, identify the insect, if the insect is there. And a lot of times on plants, you see the damage after the fact. Bug is gone. Bug is gone. Or what you're looking at is actually a fungus, or it could be a bacteria. It may not even be insect caused in the first place. It could be nutrition. So that's why you really have to put that detective hat on and look at what's going on. Is this normal for the plant? If it's not, then what's going on? Is this nutritional? Let's ask about where it's planted, how it's fertilized. So a lot of questions to arrive to the solution of the care solution. If it is insect-based, so you want to start with the least toxic solution first. If it's, let's say it's a rose bush, it's been over fertilized with too much nitrogen, it now has aphids. I'm going to tell someone to just hose the plant off. Use water and just wash it off. If that doesn't work, you can, when you wash, by the way, when you wash aphids off the plant and they end up on the ground, they don't crawl back up onto the plant. That's it. That's over with for them. If that doesn't work, then you can make a soap solution by just putting like a tablespoon of liquid dish soap in a gallon of water and lightly spraying the insects. Contact insecticide. So when you're putting soap in water, it's a contact insecticide and touches the bug. You got to see the bug, spot spray. Biopesticides, this is a whole new area of insecticides. It's getting bigger, more research being done into it, more products found. Again, sometimes plants can be quite toxic by themselves. You also have to give your treatment some time. And that's a lot of times it's very difficult for people because they want instant gratification. They want that bug gone. They want that leaf to look better. And sometimes it requires persistence, especially with weeds. You know, how do you get rid of weed? How do you get rid of bindweed? Persistence. How do you get rid of thistles? Persistence. So it may take repeat applications and patience. It's not what anyone wants to hear. Patience. So biorational insecticides can be specific to that insect or more selective to that pest. Non-target insects or animals are not affected. So biorational insecticides, a lot of them out there, a lot of them are very available. Bacillus thuringiensis, a whole bunch of different strains of this, BT. BTI israeliensis is what you use to control gnats, fungus gnats, black flies, mosquitoes, midges. Midges are those little tiny flying biting insects. Midges carry some viruses, as tiny as they are, they do carry some viruses. BTI, you can buy this in the spring at big box stores. Murdoch's has it. I'm sure everybody else does. But those are the mosquito dunks. They're those brown donut-like looking things. So you can buy those. You put them in water. They dissolve very, very, very slowly. They're as hard as a rock. If you've got fungus gnats, I recommend that you put it in whatever container you use to water, add water to it. And every time you water, you're putting Bacillus thuringiensis down into the soil. It only targets BTI and Kristaki, and there's a couple others, only targets very specific insects. So it's a bacteria that only goes after some, but not all. Very targeted. Spinosad, that is derived from a lily. This is non-selective, and so it can be very, very toxic. And you want to use this very selectively. I will use this in my high tunnel or outside on my cabbage, my cauliflower, my broccoli, and I'll do one application. This is to control the cabbage loopers, those little white butterflies that make your broccoli very interesting. And then I'll cover it with a floating row cover to keep the rest of the butterflies off. And then I'll even put a little layer of spinosad on top of that floating row cover. And that's how I control those insects throughout the summer. I only use it maybe 2 or 3 times at the most because insects can get resistant to this one very, very quickly. Acidactrin, this is your neem oil, non-selective, non-selective. That means it will take out your pollinators and your butterflies too. Myco-insecticides. So now we're talking more of like a fungus or mycorrhizae type, Beauveria bassiana, also to control very select insects. And biopesticides, bacteria and fungal product antibiotics to kill other microbes. We don't call these antibiotics pesticides, but that's exactly what they are to a bacteria. A microbe of a different species is often nothing more than a competitive pest that should die, so it produces chemicals with the intention of killing it. So that's how a biopesticide works, and so very selective too. Plants do the same thing. From a plant's point of view, many insects are nothing more than dangerous leaf-eating parasites that should die. This is from Dr. Alex Burzow. So again, an entomologist with a sense of humor. So plants produce insecticides like caffeine and nicotine to keep those obnoxious six-legged vegetarians away. They also produce pesticides to keep furry four-legged vegetarians away too. So think of like cattle, horses, sheep, goats, that sort of thing. Plant-derived pesticides are plant-derived essential oils, primarily obtained by steam distillation or by other process from plant leaves, flowers, or seeds. They can act as an insect growth regulator. Modes of action such as anti-feeding, prevention of molting, suffocation, cuticle disruption. So how these all work. So just what am I talking about here? Peppermint or spearmint, that's a repellent. Rosemary, moths, flies, mosquitoes, ticks. So when you're trying to deal with mosquitoes and ticks, that really isn't just one essential oil. You got to open up the cupboard and use almost all of them. We need to take mosquitoes very, very seriously. I haven't really heard a lot about cinnamon repelling cockroaches. We don't have a problem with silverfish here in Cheyenne, in Wyoming. Dust mites. Cloves to repel wasp, ants, cockroaches, and aphids. Lemongrass. Now, the thing with lemongrass oil, beekeepers will use lemongrass to attract honeybees. Honeybees love lemongrass. And if you get lemongrass on you as a beekeeper, or you're around honeybees, or your neighbors have honeybees, you could all of a sudden end up with bees physically on you. They won't sting you at that point, but they love lemongrass. And so when you see people wearing the bee beard, or they got bees on them, they've put lemongrass oil on themselves specifically so that the bees will come and sit on them. Strange but true. Lavender, supposed to repel mosquitoes, fleas, flies, spiders. Citronelle, we do know citronelle works well for a mosquito repellent, gnats. I don't know about fleas and spiders. There's a lot of books out there on this. It's mostly anecdotal, so you got to be careful with that. There's not a lot of research with it other than the lemongrass and honeybees. Let's see. So from Lorraine, how would you apply the essential oils, dilute in oil, water, make a spray? Usually you make a spray, and I would recommend that you do some research on how to do that, because a lot of times those essential oils, of course, just sit on the water. You can add the essential oil to water, shake it up really well, spray it, keep shaking it and spraying it. That's probably the best way to apply it. I'd be apprehensive to put it in an oil type of emulsion, just because the oil can act as a suffocant, and oils can also act as an herbicide. So you do want to be careful with that, for sure. But kind of a neat way to go if you want to be a little bit more organic or environmentally conscious about that. Okay, diseases formulated as sprays. I know I said I was going to go for a little bit more benign topic here, and this is. So again, they're targeted to a very specific insect pest. Non-toxic to mammals, must be consumed by the insect, various fungal, not persistent. And so let's see, question here. So these oils repellents, or do they kill the insect? They're typically just repellents. Clove oil, you can use clove oil for dampening off disease on plants. You know, Kathy Shreve talked about that in the plant propagation class, and you can, I think she uses chamomile, but you can also put some cloves in there and kind of make a tea for dampening off for those bacteria and fungal problems. Oh, Japanese beetles. This is the one where I have all the master gardeners on the lookout for. Japanese beetles have been found in Scotts Bluff. They've been found in Fort Collins, and they were found up in Sheridan last year. Japanese beetles are voracious pests, voracious eaters, and they do a lot of damage to the host of that they eat is pretty phenomenal. Everything from trees to roses to vegetables, shrubs. It's just huge what they'll go after. So we need to be on the watch out for them. The product that works the best against them is milky spore disease. They have to ingest it in order for it to work. Again, we talked about Bacillus thuringiensis. This is Kerstaki, and this is the one that you'd want to use in your vegetable garden. And this works on the leaf, the cabbage loopers that like to eat your cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower. Bacillus thuringiensis israeliensis, again, black flies, fungus gnats, midges, mosquitoes. So it's very specific to that insect, which is the good news, because it doesn't hurt the good guys. It doesn't hurt your bees, the native bees, your butterflies. Easy to buy this stuff too. You can get it online, and that's going to be your most reliable place to find it is online. So the San Diego variety for larvae of Colorado potato beetle. The larvae of Colorado potato beetle are exceptionally ugly, easy to find. They leave a huge amount of frass, which is kind of an entomology term for bug poo. Elm leaf beetle, Bovaria bassiana, Nosema locustia. I have used the Nosema, and you can buy it pretty readily. It is a protozoa. They take barley and they infuse it with the Nosema, which is a protozoa, and the grasshopper eats this stuff, eats the barley, barley flakes, and within 24 hours they die. Grasshoppers are pretty weird. Grasshopper will eat another grasshopper, so they're cannibalistic. And so another grasshopper will eat a dead grasshopper that was killed by the Nosema, and that will kill that grasshopper. I've used this in the past. It works beautifully. So if you don't have chickens to control grasshoppers in your vegetable garden, this is the next best thing. You do need to repeat apply it, but again, this is something that you can use barehanded. I don't recommend it, but if you did use it barehanded, it's not going to hurt you. But you put it down every other day to control grasshoppers. So it's a very good, very benign, very insect-specific target. So I don't see a lot of gypsy moth problems. I do see gypsy moth damage now and then. Nuclear polyhedrous virus for gypsy moth control. It's a little more complicated on using it. So from Ken, would there be a concentration of the food scale like the bird that eat the grasshopper? No, it's not. The biomagnification in these, especially on the Nosema locustia, it's not going to hurt birds. My cats love to eat grasshoppers too. Ooh. It's not going to hurt them just because it's so specific to that insect that it's not going to jump, which is the good news. Ants, we talked a little bit about ants. Repellents. I'm in the line that is, if they're in my vegetable garden or in my house, I want them dead. I want to kill them. And so I like, again, depends upon if they're the black and red ones, they're harder to kill, but I will mix the equal, which has got aspartame in it, the sugar substitute, with flour, with a little 20 team borax, and then I'll sprinkle those hills with it. Cinnamon also works. Cinnamon in high concentrations is an insecticide by itself. So too much ingestion of cinnamon can be toxic. And so I will take red hots and I'll throw them out on those big mounds, those big volcano mounds of ants that we get out on the prairie, the black and red ones. And I'll throw a couple red hots out there and that knocks them back. That knocks them back a lot. I've never tried citric acid extracts. I haven't tried a lot of the other stuff. But again, the ants have to carry it down into their nest, and it has to be eaten by the queen in order to be effective. If you're just killing the workers, you're not achieving anything because the queen just makes more to replace the ones that died. Kill the queen. Kaolin clay. So kaolin clay, you can go buy this at the health food stores, and it's used for digestive reasons. You know, so if you have heartburn or indigestion, you don't want to take calcium carbonate, you can take kaolin clay, which not a huge difference, but anyway, you can take the clay. And what they've learned in the fruit industry is that if you take kaolin clay and you dilute it down and you spray it on your apple trees, so you're spraying the fruit because you're trying to keep thrips and other little bugs that like to take the little bites out of apples. It doesn't prevent it or repel them from doing it, but what they've discovered is that with the kaolin clay, when the insect bites on it, it literally breaks their jaw. And so an insect with a broken jaw can't eat, and so it starves to death. So sprayed on leaves or fruit, it leaves this protective powdery film, and you can buy this. It's a product called Surround. So you can buy Surround and spray it on your fruit. And they've also discovered that it helps reduce heat stress, fruit drop, and sunburn on some fruits and vegetables. And so your peppers, which are very susceptible to sunburn, you could spray them with Surround or kaolin clay and kind of like a sunscreen for your vegetables. So it works against leaf rollers, leaf hoppers, mites, codling moth, thrips, plum curculio, stink bugs, apple maggots. So it works on a whole bunch of insects. And so if you gotta spray your fruit trees, this is a product you might want to consider. So the question is, can you make your own? Sure. I don't know what the dilution ratio is. You would have to play with that. But you want enough on that fruit to prevent, coddling. And we have a problem with coddling moths here. And we do have a problem with thrips taking little bites out of fruit. It may even work for the spotted winged Drosophila. I don't know totally on that, but you could try spraying it on your raspberries when you first start seeing the raspberry coming up, so that, when that female spotted winged Drosophila lays her eggs and the eggs hatch, and the larvae are going to want to burrow into that drupe, that little fruit on the raspberry. They don't want to burrow into the drupe. It may be enough that it breaks the jaw on that larva. You try it. Neem, Azadactrin indica. This is a tree that is native to India. And the active ingredient, Azadactrin, they've also isolated more than 25 other compounds from this. And the modes of action on this are many. And so it's really unlikely that an insect is going to develop resistance to this. But again, keep in mind that neem oil is non-selective. It'll kill everything. Good guys, your bees, your damselflies, dragonflies, ladybugs. So you have to be very careful. You want to spot spray with this. So they've discovered with neem oil, Azadactrin, that can act as a repellent, a feeding inhibitor, egg-laying deterrent, growth retardant, sterilants, and direct toxins. So because of all these different modes of action, it's really unlikely that the insect is going to develop resistance to this. They've also worked with this a little bit as a fungicide, and in some cases it can suppress fungus. So think of like your powdery mildew type fungus. Okay, LD is greater than 13,000, so it's very non-toxic. Biodegrades rapidly in the sunlight and within a few weeks within the soil. So it's non-persistent in the environment, which is what we like. Non-selective. Okay, spinosad. Okay, all right. Why did I think it was from the lily family? Anyway, soil-dwelling bacteria called Saccharopolyspora spinosa, with a much more pronounceable name called spinosad, produces less risk than most insecticides to mammals, birds, and fish, which is good news. Unique modes of action coupled with a high degree of activity on targeted pests and low toxicity on non-target organisms. So again, I use this to control my cabbage loopers. And an article, if you want to research this, April issue of the Agriculture Research Magazine, produced by the USDA ARS. Okay. So this again is a nerve toxin, excites the nervous system. Bug pretty much shakes itself to get apart paralysis within minutes. So this is very, very fast. So I actually have people call me and want to know of a really humane way to kill an insect. And of course, the first thing that comes to my mind is, well, the bottom of my shoe works pretty fast too. But anyway, this is fast. So within minutes. So if you're looking for a humane way to knock down an insect, spinosad's going to do it for you. Okay. Diatomaceous earth. We talked about this. Skeletized remains of diatoms. Again, it abrades the insect, and the insect just leaks. All the fluids leaks out, leaks to death. Non-toxic. Texas A&M, the University of Texas A&M, College Station has done a lot of work with diatomaceous earth. Texas has a huge flocks of Angora goats. Angora goats are very prone to a biting or a chewing lice. And that chewing lice gets into their fiber and it causes the fiber to mat. And the only thing that they've found that works is a chemical cocktail, which has caused a lot of people problems. They tried using diatomaceous earth on the Angora goats, and what they found is that it abrades the fiber. They've also tried using diatomaceous earth to control internal parasites in goats and horses and cattle. And they've also found that the gut is too wet to really be very effective. But Texas A&M's done quite a bit of research on this. Okay, from April, doing some fast research. 1 quart of kaolin clay, 1 tablespoon of liquid soap, and 2 gallons of water. You've just made your own spray to protect your fruit crop. So you can check out the chat box and get some more information. So thank you, April. Good to have that recipe. And I will save the chat. I will try to save the chat. Seems like every time I do this, it's wants to be a little different. Garlic. This garlic is used extensively in organic cropping systems. And I do mean extensively. If you put in garlic insecticide in your internet search, it'll come up with thousands. And so the organic growers use garlic oil almost exclusively. It's non-selective, so you have to be very careful with that. Again, if you see some problems, you can go ahead and spot spray if nothing else is working. The recipe to make your own garlic solution, you want to get the stinkiest, smelliest, strongest garlic you can find. 1 quart of water, throw it in a blender, mix it for about 5 minutes, strain it because you want to get all the other stuff out, dilute to 1 gallon, and then spray directly on the insects. You can use it as a soil drench. So this is something that might work for like the black vine weevil, which starts off in the soil in the larva stage. And so a soil drench to control it. You can try using garlic oil as a soil drench with your corn crop for corn rootworm. And works to repel, suppress mosquitoes, aphids, caterpillars, whiteflies, mites, some beetles. Again, it is just the go-to for organic cropping systems. Boron, boric acid, or borax, 20 mule team, who knew? A laundry soap could also be used as an insecticide. Works as a stomach poison, slow to work. So this is where the patience comes in and the persistence. I have springtails, which are a domestic type insect, and I know what they are. I don't pay much attention to them. They make my husband crazy, but I'll put down a little borax to control them. And springtails are a lot of times mistaken for fleas because they jump. They're 2 insects in 2 different separate orders. They're not even related. They're not cousins. They're one's from Mars and one's from Venus type. That's how different they are. but a lot of times the springtails are mistaken for fleas. Rare that we have fleas in Wyoming. The LD on this is 3,200, so it's actually pretty benign. So from Rebecca, I mix borax with honey to control ants. Yeah, by all means, throw a little aspartame in there too, and you can mix some flour and cinnamon in there. You can get pretty creative. And again, the whole game with this is kill the queen, kill the queens. Okay, applies a thin film. Insects pick it up on their legs, groom themselves, ingest it. Or you can make a 1 to 2% solution and spray it. You don't want to go any higher than that because you'll end up making a herbicide, unless you want to make an herbicide. Okay, pesticidal soaps. Okay. Go back. Okay. So the way the pesticidal soaps work, and you can buy one, there's one on the market called Safer Soap, which is actually a really good product, works very well. I have used it off-label to control powdery mildew. It suppresses the powdery mildew, does a very good job of that. Hard to control fungus and powdery mildew because of the spores have this protective chitin shell on them. And so it's hard to penetrate that. So this is another game of persistence. But pesticidal soaps act as a suffocant, excuse me. So they get into the sphericals of the insect and clog those breathing pores. It has to touch the insect. So you actually have to have a direct spray on the insect. If you're going outside with this, you want the temperatures 85 degrees or cooler, not hotter. And you don't want to spray stressed or wilted plants because this again will act as an herbicide. And so copper sprays, I don't really talk a lot about copper sprays because copper can actually be quite toxic to handle. And too much concentration of copper can again act as an herbicide. It's non-selective. Animal problems, human problems with too much copper. And so I don't really go there because you can buy it, you can use it as a pre-made formula. I don't look at it as being in my bag of tricks for benign. I do know that in some cases the organic farming community will use it, but it's used with restrictions and could cause some problems with the organic certification later down the road, depending upon who the inspector is. Okay, insecticidal soaps, soft body insects, aphids, mealybugs, whiteflies, thrips. Not going to work on a hard-bodied insect, so your beetles with that shell on them, not going to do them. Good for indoor use, so it's not going to hurt your pets, kids. Citrus. You can make a insecticidal product, even an insecticidal enhanced soap using citrus. So you take 2 cups of boiled and steamed citrus peel. So 2 cups of citrus peel. My husband eats a lot of oranges and grapefruit, so it's pretty easy to accumulate. And you boil them down and strain it, and then mix it into your insecticidal soap. Traps. So you can make your own traps. You can get Tanglefoot. It's easy to buy. You can get tangled up in it pretty easily too. So you want to be careful with it, but you can make your own yellow sticky traps. So you want to find a yellow that is like bright yellow, and you put tanglefoot on it and then hang it in your garden or your greenhouse or even around your potted plants. There's a lot of insects that think the color yellow is the end all to be all, and they will fly to it and stick to it. So it's good for white flies, fungus gnats, aphids, leaf miners, thrips, apple maggot flies. And you want to hang, and I've seen some pretty cool apple maggot flies done by a guy who took plastic balls, just the little kid-sized plastic balls about a 4-inch diameter, hung them, put a hook in there, hung them, painted them with tanglefoot, and then hung them in his apple trees and his cherry trees. And he had a very nice little orchard, and he hung them all up in there, and they seemed to work. They weren't catching a lot of the coddling moth flies, moths, but they were catching some, and that's the important thing. You want to pull the males out of that population so that when the females lay eggs, they're sterile. So you can make your own. He had like 4 for per tree. He was pretty serious about protecting his apples. Okay. Horticulture oils. You can buy horticulture oils, and it's usually a very light petroleum oil. Sometimes there's other stuff in them. Typically, there's just a horticulture oil. They're used for suffocating insects, and scale insects, you know, your oyster shell scales, are what you use horticulture oils for. You can make your own. Canola oil is listed as a biopesticide. So you can go to the grocery store, or you can go to Sam's Club or wherever and buy the big thing of, if you've got aspen trees or you've got lilacs or ash trees with oyster shell scale, you can get some canola oil. And what I tell people to do is just put the canola oil on a cloth or a sponge and just sponge it right onto the scale. You suffocate it. Trying to control scale insects are difficult because we really don't know when they're going to emerge. And so, you know, they've got this shell, this protective shell, and then the babies hatch and crawl out from underneath the mother shell, and they look like little yellow pollen. Their ability to camouflage is phenomenal. Wind catches them, blows them around. We think that after a few days of warm weather is when they're going to emerge. So actually now is the time to start applying a horticulture oil to plants that have scale on them. And again, you just light film, light coat. If it snows or rains, you gotta go back out and redo it. So that's the only downside. But even if you did a straight horticulture oil that's petroleum based, you still have to go back out and reapply it. So it's that persistence and repeat use. But canola oil is listed as a biopesticide. And it's just like corn gluten meal is also listed as an herbicide. Yeah, there's a lot of cross foods as pesticides. Okay. So we talked a little bit off and on about the spotted ring Drosophila, very small fruit fly. I showed you the little traps, little, if you can't find the fancy plastics with the screw-on lid, you can make your own using a party cup, a red party cup. And you just put a couple holes on the side just so that you can hang it. Some stale wine, beer, water with fruit in it that's fermenting. That's all it takes. What you want them to do is attract them to that. They fly into it and they drown. So you could put a little bit of oil on there so that it makes it a little more difficult for them to escape the water, you know, break that water surface tension, so that they stick to it and they drown. So you want to, depending upon how big your raspberry, strawberry patch is, you don't need a lot, maybe like 3 of those per 10 feet. that would be a lot. So they've also found that a natural sugar alcohol, erythritol, which I believe you can go to natural grocery stores and buy this. I think I've seen it on the shelf. Half pound of that to a gallon of water sprayed on the fruit, 75% larva kill. Works by possibly drying them out. They don't know quite what the mode of action is on that one. I put it in my tea. Okay. So it's one of these that is a multitasker. Oh, beneficial insects. This is where I go to. I try to set my garden up so that I've got a balance of good bugs to bad bugs. And I really want my good bugs to work for me. And so I try to have flowering plants from April to October for them so that they have a food source. And these guys have some pretty voracious appetites. Some of them are most of these guys are non-selective. Ladybugs and their larvae. Their larvae are don't look anything like what you'd expect. And one year I had someone bring a ladybug larva in, and she had drenched it in malathion. I opened up the jar and it was like, wow. Rinsed the poor thing off a couple times and tossed it outside where I knew I could find some food. She ended up becoming a master gardener, and quite the extraordinary master gardener after that. Green lacewings, beautiful, beautiful insect. When they lay their eggs, they lay them on a stalk. So they'll stand up about, an inch, and then on top of it is the egg. And it's kind of a defense mechanism to protect that egg from predators that might be crawling around. But if you see an egg on top of a stalk, that is your green lacewing, and so worth protecting. Praying mantis, we have quite a good population here, and you gotta really appreciate and respect an insect that has a head that swivels and can look at you. Non-selective, they will even eat their own brothers and sisters. So putting out egg cases is always kind of risky because you only may get one out of that whole group. If you can get them as adults, it's better. But again, they're non-selective with the leading buddy. Beneficial nematodes. Again, these you can buy. And these are usually used as a soil drench. And so they'll go after a whole host of things. If you're having problems with carrots, and especially soil-borne or your red crops, and you're having problems with bad nematodes, there's good nematodes to go after the bad nematodes. Trichogama wasp. And I know that word wasp in there always gets everyone's attention, and it's like, ooh, no wasp. These are non-stinging, tiny, tiny little girls. I don't know if you can see this. So you could fit one here. That's how tiny they are. And they, so they find maggots and larvae, and they lay their eggs on top of the larva, and then the larva hatches into its host, the caterpillar or maggot or larva, and so they eat it from the inside out. There's been movies made about this. It was kind of scary. Okay, Incarcia formosa, whitefly parasites. So this is something the whitefly actually has to ingest in order for it to work. This is a greenhouse, primarily a greenhouse issue, but this is where, if I had whiteflies, hope I never get whiteflies, this would be your first step in trying to control them. And you have to get these guys before the problem gets out of control. So you don't want to have 10 ladybugs and 10,000 aphids, because it's just, the odds aren't in favor of the ladybugs. Minute pirate bug, again, kind of non-selective. They look like a black box elder bug. Whole bunch more beneficial insects. Some of them are just natural flea out there. There's even one out there called the assassin bug. And the assassin bug nymph will cover itself in lint and dust to protect itself from predation. And so apparently other bugs don't want to eat a bug that's covered in dust and lint. And so they're very interesting looking when you see them out in the field. You can buy insects, beneficial insects online. There's a lot of insectaries. There's an insectary up in Montana, and that one in Montana specializes in insects that go after weeds. And so they will sell you insects that go after knapweed, Russian thistle, Dalmatian toadflax, and down in New Mexico, they're working with some insects that go after bindweed. So we're starting to find bugs that will help us control noxious weeds. So again, the less chemicals we have to put out there and the more we can go to the softer methods like biopesticides and beneficial insects, I think better for all of us. I've seen brown lacewings in Sheridan, but not green lacewings. That's interesting. You might want to take a picture of that brown lacewing. I'd love to see a picture, and we could send it on to Scott Shell for exact identification on it. Okay, so now we're going to kind of switch gears here just a little bit and talk about herbicides. And so the thing with herbicides is there's not been as much research done on them as insecticides. And so we don't know as much as we should. For Debbie, saw my first ladybug of the season in the yard today. Also came across a mantis egg case, so lucky day. Yeah, I heard a meadowlark. Got a meadowlark out there yakking away. And I saw some member of the Lepidoptera family go fluttering by. And I was like going, wow, good luck. So herbicides, they come in a bunch of different formulas. Amino acid synthesize inhibitors, cell membrane disruptors, so cell membrane disruptors. Think of something that's going to break down that waxy cuticle on a leaf. Growth regulators. Growth regulators can actually tell a plant to grow very rapidly, and they literally grow themselves to death. Lipid synthesize inhibitors, photosynthetic inhibitors, seed growth inhibitors, and then a whole area of unclassified. Glyphosate. I actually don't have any problems with Roundup or glyphosate. I just tell everybody to be very careful using this. Wear your gloves, no shorts, no flip-flops, spot spray, and I'll tell people to use Roundup, especially if it's in a perennial bed and they're having problems with grass, and to put on a blue nitrile glove. You don't ever want to use the yellow dishwasher gloves because those won't protect your hand, but the blue nitrile ones will. So you want to use a protective glove, and you can put Roundup in a cup and use a paintbrush, and you can paint that on grass that's in places where you don't want it. And so in my perennial flower bed, I am fighting a rhizomatous grass, and I just paint it on. I just spot treat. I don't spray randomly with it. I just spot treat it. If it gets on a leaf of another plant, I immediately remove that leaf. Hopefully it's not the only leaf on that plant, but I immediately remove it. So Roundup works by blocking critical respiration enzyme pathways. So the plant can't respirate, and so that causes a whole bunch of problems in that plant. Cell membrane disruptors, so now we're talking about different class of herbicides. Post-emergent contact herbicides activated there. Now these ones are activated by sunlight, where a lot of stuff is breaks down with sunlight. These are activated to form active compounds that disrupt the plant cells, causing disintegration of cell membranes and chloroplasts. So this, again, takes apart that waxy cuticle and it works its way down in. And so it's disintegration of cell membranes and chloroplasts. So on a bright sunny day, these herbicide injury symptoms can occur in 1 to 2 hours. So this works very, very fast. The growth regulator, herbicide uptake is through the leaves, interferes with numerous biological activities, protein synthesis of the plant, moves systemically in the plant, so it can move from one leaf to the other, usually from lower leaves up. Symptoms develop on newly developing leaves, so even though it might move from the bottom leaf up, it's going to concentrate first in the top leaves. 2,4-D works this way. 2,4-D is widely used. This is a primary herbicide for dandelion control. Again, 2,4-D, we talked a little bit about this the other night. It's used a lot in lawn fertilizer formula. So your weed and feed has got 2,4-D in it. If the fertilizer with this is used on a day that's hot, we're going to get hot out, the 2,4-D can volatilize off, form a vapor. The vapor can drift and cause herbicide damage on plants. Grapes, linden trees, tomatoes. There's actually a pretty good list of things that this causes damage to. So when you use this, check the weather, use it, make sure that it's not going to get really hot that day. And I tell most people, don't worry about the dandelions. That's hard. Homeowners think dandelions are just the worst thing ever in their lawns. And so there's a war against dandelions. Dandelions are some of the first blooming flowers, and they provide the first pollen and nectar source to your native bees, your bumblebees, like the little lepidoptera that I saw flying by. That's their first source of food. Honeybees will go to it. So it's actually, even though it's not native to the United States, not native to North America, it still has become a very important first food source, and every part of a dandelion is edible. You can make teas out of it, you can eat it, you can make wine out of it. I have roasted dandelion root tea that is actually quite tasty. So, okay. Soil applied herbicides. Here's the corn gluten meal. And this interferes with the development of seedlings as they emerge from the soil. Corn gluten meal can be an all-natural weed and feed fertilizer. So it's about 10% nitrogen. You apply it 20 pounds to 1,000 square feet. If you talk to Chris Hilger, he doesn't believe in it, doesn't think it works, but he tried using it in Oregon, in Corvallis, Oregon, where it's very, very wet and damp. And I suspect that it just kind of got washed down below the root system. And so it was below where the root, the radical would come out. Dr. Christensen at Ohio State University was the first person to discover that this worked as a kind of a pre or post-emergent herbicide. He was using it in his raspberry patch, and he was using it as a fertilizer. So it does work. Its persistence, you can use it for your spring annuals and your winter annual weeds in your lawn. Again, it takes time for it to work, but if you use this in the spring, 10% nitrogen, slow release, that's all the fertilizer you need to use for that lawn. And then you use it again in the fall, end of September. And it's kind of acts as another source of a slow release nitrogen. Okay, vinegar. Again, this is another go-to in the organic cropping systems. Organic farmers use this a lot. You can buy it at 20% strength, which, so I'm gonna, toss out a little caution to this, because at 20%, it can hurt you too. So you're gonna wanna wear protective glasses, wear your gloves. It kills anything it touches. It's not selective. Normally what they'll do with it is they'll put it in like a paint tray with a roller, and they'll roll it onto the plants. So like your annual, like a bindweed, bindweed is persistence. Puncture vine, it'll work on puncture vine. It'll work on a whole bunch of, it'll work on anything that it touches. Perennials will keep coming back. So Canadian thistle treated with 5% vinegar, which you can buy any place. You go to Sam's Club and buy it in a 2-pack. 5%, you spray it full strength onto the plant. Do it when it's hot out. 100% shoot burn down. Roots aren't affected. So again, this is persistence. You got to, as soon as you start seeing it growing again, that thistle, you got to reapply the vinegar and just keep at it until the plant exhausts itself and can no longer come back, can no longer grow back. But again, it's not selective. Be careful. Okay. So these are the ultimate grasshopper eaters. I realize that not everyone's going to grow turkeys. And this is the end of my program for tonight. Questions, thoughts, comments? You can go ahead and unmute and ask questions if you want, or if you want to share anything, go ahead and do that. Turkeys are amazing grasshopper eating machines. These are a small flock of turkeys that were on top of my garage. They were able to get up to the garage because the back side of the garage goes up against the ground. So they'd walk on top of the garage, and then they would try to fly off. And I got to tell you, they're lousy flyers, but they're amazing grasshopper eating machines. And they would walk down to Crow Creek and then up to or alfalfa field. And so they were easily walking a mile a day and eating grasshoppers in the route. I have a livestock guardian dog, and she would just follow them along, just stuck with them, kept them safe. I didn't lose any to coyotes, but they sure ate all the grasshoppers. That was pretty amazing. So anyway, I'm not seeing questions. You guys asked some good questions throughout the program. Okay.
As far as like growing greens, like your kale and your arugula and such, what's what could you do to try to avoid getting those little bugs that I get, which I'm not sure what they are, but is there a spray that you can use so that you're not tasting the spray later? Something safe to at least repel the bugs, not necessarily kill them.
Yeah, that's kind of tough because those plants like kale and your mustards are used as trap crops to get other bad bugs to them. So people who are growing a lot of winter squash will grow some of those trap crops, the kales and mustards, to lure the bad bugs to those.
Interesting.
What can you use on them? You might try some of the essential oils, the botanicals on them. You could try using diatomaceous earth, put it, just put or surround, make your own surround and put that on there. Yeah, that's hard, especially when I tell you that they're used as a trap crop to get the bad guys. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I wish I had a better answer for you. Okay. So the next class is on landscape design, and we meet in person for that one. Bring your colored pencils, crayons, whatever. We'll work with color. I also work with little dots, sticky dots. And so we'll rethink how to do a landscape design. We'll pull in the site analysis. I'll really, we'll have fun doing this because this is a hands-on class. And so it's a workshop night. And then I'll give everyone the take-home test. So you can take it home, work on it, get with your friends, your classmates. You can email me and ask me questions. So it's an open book test, and it's meant to help you learn a little bit more. And that's the feedback I've been getting on this approach, is that I've learned that people learn a lot doing it this way. Any other thoughts, comments, questions? I'm going to stop sharing here. Got my screen back. Okay. All right, everybody. Well, if there aren't any more, and again, if you want to unmute, you're welcome to do that. But otherwise, I'm not seeing any questions. Aha, thank you. Yes.
Actually, I have a question about my peanut plant. I wonder if you can see it. It looks like I just put it under my super bright LED grow lights that I just got, which seem to be helping some seeds come up. I planted some California poppy seeds, but they're getting kind of yellow, and I'm wondering if they're getting too much light, like the scent, like the veins are green, but then like the edges of the leaves are kind of pale. They're kind of closed up for the day, so I don't know if you can see that at all.
Yeah, that's kind of cool thing with the peanuts, is that, you know, they open up and photosynthesize during the day, and at night another hormone steps in and
Yeah,
and then close up. So they go to bed. They go to bed. So what I'm seeing is it's not too much light. They actually need a little bit of, they need a little bit of nitrogen.
Oh, it's time to fertilize already.
Yeah, it's time to fertilize. So whatever you use, make sure that it's a really diluted mixture. So if the normal rate would be, 1 cup per plant, I'd cut that all the way down to like 1/5 of a cup. So that's how much I would dilute it down.
Okay, I'll try that. Thank you.
Yeah.
So
Along with that, another peanut question.
Sure.
I have several in a old lettuce container or whatever. Okay, is it time to up pot them when they start getting to be about the size of April's? Or are they going to be disturbed by that?
I'd let them stay in there for quite a while. I wouldn't up pot them right away. Let them grow in there. Let them get a little bit more root bound in there before you up pot them.
Okay.
Yeah. So from Dee, she says, I'm off to Oahu. I highly recommend the North Shore of Oahu. And on the North Shore, they have garlic shrimp, yummy. And then there's a place that makes peanut butter. They do infused peanut butter with coconut that is just to die for. In fact, last time I was there with some friends, she got like the giant 2-pounder jar or whatever it was. It was everything we could do not to eat the whole thing. So Dee, have fun. Go watch the surfers and enjoy yourself. And all right, everybody, you guys have a good night. Have a good weekend. Have fun. Go out and play in your gardens. Go outside and play. Good night.
Catherine, good night.